So what I want to ask you first of all is, um, in running for, if I understand it correctly, if you're running for Attorney General, then you can't simultaneously be running for Congress. Is that true?
That is true.
So that means you're giving up the congressional seat
It is
without.
true.
Why?
But let me tell you, I am giving up the congressional seat, but there are really good people who are running in my place. I've been working to develop their talent and skill, and I believe in them. So it's going to be fine. But the reason I'm leaving Congress is because I think I can help more people faster at the Minnesota Attorney General's office than I can in Congress. As you know, state attorneys general have been leading the fight on a multitude of things, including on the first three battles that were fought on the travel/Muslim ban were by Minnesota Attorney General, well, by attorneys generals, including the Minnesota Attorney General, but also the separation policy, where the Trump administration is separating children from parents, is being led by state attorney generals, including other things like state attorney generals are fighting back to protect the Affordable Care Act. State attorney generals are fighting back to fight for net neutrality. Also, Minnesota has joined several other states in fighting the opioid crisis because manufacturers made false claims in marketing about the level of addiction and effectiveness of these drugs. But not only that, California is leading attorney general is suing Betsy DeVos and being joined by other state attorney generals because the student loan servicers are defrauding student loan borrowers and charging them more money and things like that. So I feel like the most effective way I can be a part of the struggle today is by joining the fight to become Minnesota Attorney General, and then standing up for consumers, standing up for people in terms of their rights as citizens. So it's about economic rights and civil and human rights, and that's the fight I'm jumping into.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe you want to say a little bit more about those two things, about economic rights, what you have in mind, and because you mentioned a number of things that other attorney generals are also doing. Are there any specific things that are unique to your candidacy?
Well, yeah. Well, one unique thing is that it's for the people of the state of Minnesota. But, you know,
Yeah.
I do plan on being aggressive and helping to lead the effort of nationally with the help of other attorneys generals. There are a number of things that I'm quite concerned about. One of them being antitrust. If you look at nearly any industry here in the United States, nearly all of them are concentrating at an alarming rate. We've seen a number of mergers and acquisitions, and these things are bad for consumers. They're bad for workers. They're bad for small business. They're bad for innovation, and they're bad because they make everywhere just like everywhere else. I mean, if you've ever driven down the highway in California or Minnesota or New York, what are you going to see? You're going to see a Chili's, you're going to see a Target, you're going to see Walmart, and it's all the same. Actually, the product diversity and the diversity of companies and small businesses makes for a richer life for all of us. And that's just massive standardization that goes along with this market concentration and these trust building is a bad thing. And I also think, Rabbi, that if you look at wage stagnation in the United States, part of it is explained by the fact of monopsony. Now we talk about monopoly, but what's the other side? Monopsony. If a company is the only buyer of labor in the community, it determines the wages. If you have multiple employers, you can have them compete for workers and wages will rise. But if there's just one or two or three, they can say, this is what we're paying, that's all we're paying. If you don't like it, move. And that's a bad thing. So I do want to break ground and lead on that front as well. And I also think that the Minnesota Attorney General can offer leadership when it comes to criminal justice. Now, it is the prerogative of local county officials to do most of the prosecution, but the Attorney General has a role to play in terms of officer-involved shooting when it comes to training, when it comes to coordination, when it comes to screening, when it comes to the educational process. The Attorney General has a lot to say about second chance. Are we going to have a whole set of collateral consequences for ex-felons, or are we going to try to get them back into society where they can be productive? Things like voting, things like rationalizing some of the restrictions. Now, look, I would be opposed to somebody with a sex offense working in a daycare, obviously. But if you have a prior small theft, why shouldn't you be able to pursue a social work license, for example? And there's a lot of things that people are restricted from that they shouldn't be. So if you have a prior theft conviction, you can't get a barber's license. We're locking people out of the market. And we should be trying to create more ways where people can pursue their economic lives.
Yeah, beautiful.
Not less.
So, you know that there's attempts to create a different kind of legal process in which there's a kind of way of seeing the criminal or the person charged with a crime in terms of the context of who he has hurt, and trying to bring a process in which you don't first go for throwing people into jail, but first go into trying to reconstruct the damage that's been done to the community. And I wonder if that kind of approach is something that interests you.
Yeah, restorative justice is incredibly important to me. I've been working on it for years and years. When I was the director of the Legal Rights Center in Minnesota, we had several restorative justice programs, which included family conferencing circles, which included mediation, which included a number of ways to try to fill the hole that was inflicted by the harm. So you cannot always put victims and defendants back together, but sometimes you can, particularly when the victim wants to be able to say, here's what you did to me, here's how it affected my life. And sometimes victims want that more than they want somebody to go do a jail sentence. You know, because let's just say somebody throws a rock, breaks a window, you know, then they get a fine, they get restitution, they get jail. And they never have to go back to that person and say, you know, I'm really sorry I hurt you. And sometimes that's what the victim really wants. It creates, completes the circle and allows for true justice to take place. And I've seen cases where one mother lost her son at the hands of a young man. That young man went to prison, got out, but that woman reached out to her son's killer. And now this woman, whose name is Mary Robinson, goes on speaking towards with this young man. And she says, he's my son now. And I know that when he shot and killed my son, he was a 16-year-old kid. He had a lot of problems in his life. And my son could have been the one shooting him. And I just hope that we can stop the violence, start the healing, and build bonds of community between each other. But these things are not easy, and it's a lot easier if political leaders will stand for, you know, attempts at restorative justice.
Yeah, beautiful. Is there any way that in your position, should you win for Attorney General, that you could impact the problem of mass incarceration of people of color?
Oh, yeah. But, you know, let me just tell you, people of color are not the only ones mass incarcerated. People of color are certainly mass incarcerated. But you know, the United States could not be the world's leader in incarceration if all we did is lock up people of color. There's a lot of white people doing time that in a more rational system than the one we have. So to answer your main question is, what do we do about mass incarceration? What do we do about the disproportionate impact on communities of color? What do we do? Well, I want to be a voice, and have been one, for pushing back on mass incarceration. So for example, right now, I've been part of a group in Congress that helped reduce drug sentencing, you know, from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1 when it comes to powder versus crack cocaine. As people know who've watched the drug trade and the drug the drug war, whites are much more likely to have powder cocaine. Blacks are more likely to have crack. Crack was sentenced 100 times more than powder cocaine, which led to massive disparities that hit communities of color particularly hard. And I was part of the effort to reduce that disparity. I'd like to see it go to one, quite frankly. I'd like to get rid of mandatory minimum sentencing, return sentencing back to judge and probation. Let's do that. I think I'd like to change this system to put in much more job training and drug treatment within the prison walls, that if people complete it, they could get time reductions. And I think we should just straight up cut sentences. They've been too high. I mean, as a matter of fact, when I was a state legislator over 12 years ago, I co-authored a piece of legislation with a guy named Eric Lippman, who was a conservative Republican. And Eric and I introduced a bill to cut drug sentencing, not way down, but just to be the same as other states in our region. And we got hit with a tremendous pushback. People thought, well, you just letting these people run amok. I'm like, no, we're not going to let people run amok. We know even the nonviolent drug offender is a tremendous nuisance in the neighborhoods in which they do what they do. We're not saying do nothing. We're saying don't put them in prison, because that doesn't do anything other than waste a lot of money. Yeah. And so what we want to do is reduce sentencing and put the money into drug treatment, put the money into job creation, and put the money into things that might put people on a more productive path. What we learned is that most people who are out on the corner selling drugs don't want to be there. You know, if you have a neighborhood that has 65% unemployment, people will take drugs or they will sell drugs. This is the way it is. I'm not trying to excuse behavior, but I'm trying to realistically deal with the behavior, as opposed to just folding your arms and moralizing. Why don't we do something about the problem and try to actually solve it? And, you know, in my view, that is what a Minnesota Attorney General should be doing, trying to be a problem solver, trying to help lead the way to getting people back into society, as opposed to creating a permanent underclass of people. Let me also mention restoring the vote. Restoring the vote is essential. You know, in Maine and Vermont, you never lose your right to vote if you commit a crime and you people in the prison. There's no reason why people who go to prison should be essentially non-citizens for the purposes of voting. They should be allowed to vote. They should be able to participate in society. And I am a very strong advocate of felon reenfranchisement.
Yeah, there has been a systematic effort on the part of some of the right-wing billionaires to try to exclude people, both people of color, but also poor people, from the voting rolls. Would you have any ability to have some oversight over that issue should you become the Attorney General?
Absolutely. In fact, in our own state of Minnesota, we had a few cases where people were interfering on a systematic basis with the right of Native Americans to vote. There were several reservations, Red Lake, Leech Lake, and a few others, where people were showing up there and trying to interfere with their right to vote. As Minnesota Attorney General, I would collaborate with the Secretary of State, a good friend of mine named Steve Simon, to make sure that every vote counted and everybody was able to participate. That would be the goal, that would be the purpose, and I think that is absolutely essential. Plus, I would band together with other state attorney generals to protect the vote. We've got to protect the vote. And, you know, our country, the United States, we have a historic drop in voter participation. We need to increase participation. We need to get more people voting, not fewer. One of the things that we've seen since World War I is a gradual decline in voter participation. I will always be one of those folks who are saying we need to invite more people to democracy, increase the participation in our society. And as a Minnesota Attorney General, that is one of the things I'm running to do.
There's also been an effort on the part of some of the most right-wing elements in the Christian Zionists and in the Jewish community to make it illegal to support any kind of boycott of Israel or to even talk about that. to make it illegal for people on campus to talk about it. And I'm wondering if you have any sense of how your office might deal with that kind of suggestion should it happen in Minneapolis.
Well, well, look, I am not a part of the BDS movement. I don't support the movement, but I also do not oppose, I do oppose people being prohibited or punished or sanctioned from offering their own views on what they believe is right. I think that it is important for people on campus to be able to express their First Amendment rights about issues they believe are critical and important. And I would not be able to support any effort to sanction or punish people because of their concerns that they want to raise about the conflict in the Middle East. I just think it's the wrong approach. Personally, I believe we should try to get more dialogue between people. I think we should get more conversation going on between people. But if somebody wants to be a BDS supporter, I think they have a right to do that.
Yes, it's exactly our position, by the way, at Tikkun. Yeah. We don't support BDS, but we do support the right of people to articulate and push for it if that's what they believe is good. We think it's a destructive strategy that is not actually helping the Palestinian cause. But in any event, I appreciate what you say on this.
But I do think it's important. I mean, look, why spend all our time fighting about this issue? Let's try to create more justice everywhere around the world, including in the Middle East, including in the Holy Land. Let's try to figure out how we can increase democracy and human rights everywhere.
Right. Well, that leads me to another point, which is that one of the things that we've been saying at Tikkun was that the Middle East would be served by the Global Marshall Plan, and you introduced a resolution into the Congress this year and several times in the past years. It's deeply appreciated, in which you.
It's going to happen, Rabbi. It's going to happen one day.
I think so. But that Global Marshall Plan, I mean, is an answer to the question of, first of all, how do you deal with immigration? Make those countries that their people are coming from safe enough and prosperous enough so that they don't have to come to the United States. They'll be able to feed their children before they starve to death, or prostitute their children in order to make it possible. So the global market, yeah, and similarly in the Middle East, if it were possible for Israel to act in a generous way towards the Palestinian people and create a Marshall Plan for that area, along with assistance from the United States, would go a long way towards reconciliation that right now is a distant possibility. So I want to thank you. I just want to thank you for introducing the Global Marshall Plan into the Congress and for that over the course of the years.
Well, thank you. May I say that I will talk to my successors about the importance of the Global Marshall Plan. This is a tradition we have to carry on. We have to continue to fight for. And I might also mention to you, Rabbi, and everyone listening, that look, the so-called, or what we used to call the first world, the developed part of the globe, relies for its prosperity, let's be honest, on low wages, low levels of civil and human rights enforcement, low levels of environmental protection in what we used to call the third world, right? And in fact, I mean, so our prosperity is based on the want that is experienced in other parts of the world. And it's important to understand that, that we should give something back to because if there's prosperity all over the globe, then why would anyone want to leave a place where they speak the language, they have their family, they know the culture, just to go to another place to be discriminated against and mistreated? It doesn't make any sense. They're leaving because, take for example, Mexico. Since NAFTA, Mexican wages have dropped between 9 and 13%. Now, some people have said to me, oh, Keith, that's too bad for them. And my answer is, no, that's too bad for us, because that means those people are going to be a low wage sector, not only in Mexico, but in here in the United States. And the undocumented worker is an exploited worker. That we just have to say that the 12 million undocumented people in the United States are here because somebody wants them to be, but they want them here to do the work, but they don't want them to get any rights. They don't want to pay them fairly. They don't want them to be able to bargain collectively. They don't want them to be able to get occupational safety and standards. And that is what's really going on. And these trade agreements, you know, what they allow capital to travel over borders, and all capital is people who happen to own something we call a corporation, which is a legal arrangement which gives them special rights, and labor, which is a regular person, cannot travel back and forth across the border. And so corporations, certain people who get certain rights, can go back and forth across the border seeking out the lowest wages, but people, regular people, cannot go back and forth across the border seeking out the highest wages. So what it creates is an imbalance. It creates an injustice, and it creates the need for something like a global Marshall Plan. Yes, we need to have fair trade rules. Yes, we need to make sure we raise labor standards everywhere, not reduce them. We need to raise environmental standards everywhere, not reduce them. But we also need to rebuild the part of the world that so many of us rely on to get everything from cheap flowers to cheap strawberries, to cheap this, to cheap that. We need to understand our interconnectedness globally.
Beautiful, yes. You know, we proposed this, another thing called the Environmental and Social Responsibility Amendment to the Constitution. And I just wondered if you might comment on two parts of it. One part, the first part says that all money should be banned from politics at the state and national level, except money that is allocated equally by the state legislature on the state level, or by the Congress on the national level, equally to the major parties and to others important candidates.
I agree.
The second part,
I'm for that.
So that would get money out of politics in a real way.
Yep.
Not the weaker plans that say Congress should be allowed to do this, because Congress is often bought off by the very interests that we want to take out of politics. So so the first part is that. But the second part is a little bit more controversial, and it says that corporations with incomes above $50 million a year should have to get a new corporate charter once every 5 years. And we're not talking about mom and pop corporations here. We're talking about the big corporations.
So far, so good.
They have to prove a satisfactory history of environmental and social responsibility to a jury of ordinary citizens who get to hear testimony not only from the people where they are located, but anybody all over the world who has been, any community that's been affected by the operations of that corporation, get to testify before this jury, or to send it the way we're doing it, right? They don't have to show up. They can do it on the internet. And the corporations have to prove to the jury that they actually are working in an environmentally responsible and socially responsible way, or they face the possibility of losing their corporate charter. What do you think about that?
Well, let me tell you this. I like the concept, and here's why. A charter is in effect a public license to operate a corporate entity. It wasn't always in the part of our world that there were these things we now call corporations. Right. It was really kind of an outgrowth of the 1860s that the corporate entity began to develop. It is a license. And why? And if it's a license, why shouldn't that license be associated with things that license are often associated with? If I have a driver's license, that means I'm going to operate an automobile responsibly. I'm going to insure it. I'm going to obey traffic laws. If I have a license to sell peanuts, I'm going to sell them on the place and time, manner, and location that the license allows for. Now, a charter is really just a license to operate a public entity. And before the 1860s, they had license, they had charters, but they were limited in time and scope and for a certain kind of purpose. You could start a corporation to build a bridge, to build a windmill, to do certain kinds of specific duties, because people then knew that if you gave an entity the kind of power that a corporation has, it could cause trouble. Well, we're in a world now where, corporate responsibility, I think is something that we're in much greater need for.
Right.
And look, there might be people listening to me and say, oh, Keith doesn't like corporations. Wrong. I used to own one. I ran a law firm and I had a corporation that owned the company. I don't have a problem with the concept of a corporation. I have a problem with the lack of accountability. And I do think corporate licenses should be limited in duration and scope. There needs to be a showing that you are abiding by the public interest as defined by public representatives, that what you're talking about. So look, I'm not here to say that every detail is, I don't know. I'm going to study it, but I will tell you that I like the idea of limiting a corporate charter in time. I like the idea of a corporation needing to make a case to a group of citizen jurors that their corporate charter should be renewed. I like that. I like it. I like the concept.
Okay, great. So one variant that we're proposing also is, because that concept would require a constitutional amendment. There's no way that the Supreme Court, as it is or as it's likely to be in the next 20 years, is going to approve anything serious about giving corporate responsibility without there being an amendment to the Constitution that imposes on a right-wing court requirements that are really spelled out in detail. But a short-run step in this direction is to require the state or its localities to when they have a contract to offer, and they offer it to corporations to bid on, to require a social and environmental impact report from those corporations, and then to give to the contract, award the contract to those to that corporation which can fulfill the terms of the contract in a reasonable price, but has the best, amongst those has the best record of environmental and social responsibility, so that it would require that the whoever is offering the contract, whether it be the city of Minneapolis or whether it be the state, allow for that process in which you'd be rewarding those corporations that have the best record of social and environmental responsibility.
Here's the thing, you can't have it both ways. If the Supreme Court and people who claim that a corporation is a person, right, with the rights of a person, actually a corporation has way more rights than a person, as you know.
Yes.
But the fact is that if they want these sort of rights, there's going to have to be some responsibility. What they want is rights with no responsibility.
Right.
And so my thought is that there is a growing movement that the corporate entity has played such an inordinate role in the lives of people that it's going to have to take on more responsibility than just profit of law and loss for profits for its shareholders. There's going to be more that they're going to have to do. They're going to have some responsibility, environmental responsibilities, responsibilities for workers, responsibilities of all kinds. I mean, you cannot simply allow a creation of human beings, which a corporation absolutely is, to simply have greater power than other human beings. Because as I mentioned before, it is true that all a corporation is a group of people who get a license from the government to do certain things. And what it has grown into is they get a license to do things that no human can ever do. Human beings die. Corporations don't. Human beings can go to jail. Corporations don't have a body, they go to jail. People have consciences. Corporations have no conscience. In fact, you can sue a corporation if it acts like it has a conscience nowadays. And so the bottom line is it's a growing movement, and people are going to expect more from the corporate entity than they have in the past, in part because of the role that corporations play in our lives, which is deciding everywhere from what the budget's going to be to what our tax rates are going to be, to the standard and quality of our water, our air, human rights, all these kinds of things corporations have a say in. Therefore, they're going to have some responsibility too, and I am all good with that.
Fantastic. Yes, great. So now to one or two questions about your the politics of the situation. First of all, you've been the vice chair of the Democratic Party. What?
Deputy chair.
The deputy chair. Okay.
Yes.
But it is from what. Now this might be purely out of ignorance, but because my information comes from the Times, New York Times, and so forth, not from hearing what's going on in the inside. But it appears as if the Democratic Party is on the national level is doing the same thing that the current mayor of Chicago did when he was in a position to shape the candidates for in 2006, which is picking people to run not because they particularly share the mainstream, or certainly not the liberal side of or progressive side of the Democratic Party, but rather people who, in their mind, are sure winners, in part because they're more like Republicans than Democrats. And I'm wondering, we're seeing this right now with some legislation in which key Democratic senators are siding with the Republicans. And I'm wondering if you've seen any of this and whether what your feeling is about it, because it's hard for us not knowing what's really going on to understand, say, why how you could have allowed that to happen, or guess maybe been protesting it in some level or other. So I'm just wondering what you think about it.
Well, let me just tell you this. The easiest thing for me to do is to not be part of the DNC leadership, because then no one could ever blame me for anything. And if my goal in life is to never catch any blame, then that's what I would do. But sometimes in order to try to fix a situation, you have to get into that situation. And sometimes the process of change happens in a non-linear fashion. You take 3 steps, you lose 1. You go up 5 steps, you lose 2. This is the process of change. It's just that way. If you've never actually engaged in struggle, you don't know that. But if you actually ever tried to take a messed up situation and make it good, you know that you get setbacks. Martin Luther King, great. Everybody celebrates him today, but he could tell you about Albany, Georgia, and how he tried to desegregate that city, and he ran into a brick wall. And it wasn't accolades from there. He'll tell you about being persecuted by J. Edgar Hoover. He'll tell you the struggles on the road to a better situation. Yeah. And the naive and the inexperienced don't know about that. They think something's bad, you get involved, and it's fixed magically overnight, instantly. Right. So having said all that, let me say this. Yeah. I maintain now, and will continue to maintain, that the Democratic National Committee should have absolutely no role in a primary. Now, I know that there have been people who have said otherwise. I have made myself abundantly clear that I will not ever allow that policy to go forward. And if I get overruled, I get overruled, but I'm not going to be quiet about it. And if you look at the research and you read the papers on this issue, I've been clear, no, we are neutral when it comes to these races. Let me also say that sometimes people confuse the DNC and the DCCC. The DCCC got in deep with certain candidates. I oppose that. I think it's absolutely wrong. And I don't think that it is the proper role of the DNC to tell any candidate that they should drop out of the race. It's the
DCCC is the Democratic Congressional, what does it stand for? The Democratic?
It's the Democratic House Caucus. Yeah. It's the campaign to get U.S. House members of the Democratic Party elected. And the DCCC leadership has on occasion been caught telling candidates that they shouldn't run or should drop out of the race. Right. I don't agree with this. I've been public saying I don't agree with this. It's wrong, wrong, wrong. And people believe that the whole system is rigged and insiders are just pulling strings. It kills our brand when we do this. My thought is, stop it. Let the election shake out. Let the election be determined by the people who vote.
Do you face any of that in your own primary?
Well, in my own primary, I've been running really hard. And in my own primary, no powers from above have been interfering. Individual citizens have been able to offer their views. The Democratic Attorneys General Association has not weighed in for anybody, and that's good. The DCCC is not weighed in for anybody. The DNC is not weighed in, and it's going to be something that individual citizens in Minnesota will be able to decide for themselves. I'm the kind of person who, no matter how good it looks for me at the election, I don't stop working hard. I run hard all the time. And the reason I do it is because it's not about just winning an election. It's about talking to more voters, inviting people to democracy, being a part of this democratic project means that people who are running for office got to work hard and got to talk to a lot of people. So do I feel I have a good shot at the primary and the general? Yes, I do. But it's only because I've been working super hard. But I can't guarantee victory. And of course, there's a lot of folks, particularly on the far right, who are not fans of mine, as you might guess. And, they're going to do all they can to knock me off. So my point is that I'm working hard every day, talking to as many voters as I can every day, putting the public interest forward every day, and praying for victory at the primary on August 14th and the general, November 6th.
What's the date again? It's August 14th?
August 14th is my primary.
Primary. Yeah.
And then we'll know. And every day it's a little bit closer. And I think we're about 38 days out, and I'll be very happy when it's over and done with. But, but look, I have put everything into this. If I don't win, I am not in politics anymore. I'm a private citizen at that point. I've what they call bet the farm on this, right? And I did it because I have a tremendous passion for fighting for people. And I've never been one to sit in a safe seat and just, relax in a safe seat. I've always believed that you have to follow your passions, even if it involves risk. And that's what I've done. And so no matter what happens, whether I win or not, I can look at people and say, my mind, my heart told me, jump into this AG's race so I can serve more people. And it came out the way that it came out, and I think we're going to win. I'm very confident, but I'm not certain. And that's why we're working so hard.